Welcome to Tough Lies, the Golfers Podcast with Colin McDougall and Richard Zobel. Well, it's Masters Week. It's got to mean a special episode of Tough Lies, the Golfers Podcast. I couldn't be more excited. I mean, if there's a time of year that is Christmas for golfers, this is surely it. Because for most of it, right?
Yeah.
Around the globe, it's the kickoff of the golf season. Almost, fortunately where I am right now, the driving range opened this past weekend, so I actually got to go outside and hit the golf ball around, which is lovely. For many, there might be still a few snowdrifts to deal with, but it's definitely that time of year. And we have a very special guest interview with Mike Weir today. We pumped it up with our interview with Lauren Rubenstein, but you pulled a favor, and Mike very kindly joined us, and I'm super excited to share the interview. I think it's very insightful. I thought he had some really interesting things to say, which we want to unpack. And one of the themes of the show, that we're on, the journey that we're on, that is Tough Lies, the Golfers Podcast, is stories. And I know you've played it. You played in the Masters in 1993. I know you've got a lot of friends who've competed at a super high level. And I couldn't resist wanting to sort of get, a great master story as a lead-in to our interview with Mike Weir. So I'm going to put you on the spot, and I was hoping that you might have something that you could bring to our listeners that sort of will just get them it's like getting in the Christmas spirit, but it's the golf Christmas spirit that is the Masters. So do you have a great story that you want to share?
I do, and it's in the book, and it involves, first of all, 1993 was the first year, the one and only time I played in the Masters, having won the Greater Milwaukee Open in 1992. So in 93, I go in there, and unfortunately, weather was very poor that week. It was cold, it was rainy, and I just hate cold, rainy weather. But it's the Masters, and you can't help but be overly excited. You're trying to calm yourself as much as possible because it's a dream come true, and you're typically hyperactive, and that isn't conducive to playing well. So the first round, I shoot 75, and it wasn't a horrible score, but it was kind of like, that's where the cut's going to be type of thing. And I want to make the cut, want to play more than 2 rounds, obviously. So I shoot 75, and on the second round, and I get to the 12th hole at Amen Corner, the famous par 3, and I'm still 3 over par, so I'm even par for the day, and I'm trying to make the cut. Cut's going to be plus 7 or something like that, and I go ahead and I dump 2 balls in the water on 12. So my dreams of playing 4 rounds at the Masters was done. And then I'm playing the last hole, the 18th hole, and the siren goes off because the weather had to stop play. So I had to come back Saturday morning to play one hole. So typically, if this was a PGA Tour event, I'm withdrawing, saying my elbow's hurting me, and I withdraw. But there's no bloody chance I'm going to do that at Augusta National. So I get up, but my dauber's down. I'm not, I want to make the cut, and I'm not feeling great about this. So I go and play the last hole and obviously miss the cut. But I go into the locker room, take my shoes off, and I come out. And this was like 7 o'clock in the morning. And I sit down, and there's Byron Nelson. He's sitting by himself. And a little background. I got to know Byron Nelson, Joni and myself, and Byron and Peggy did the Oilman's tournament up in Banff. And Byron's the honorary member there. So I've kept in touch. And Byron sent me a note after I won, so he befriended me. So I sit down, and Byron says, "Richard, what did you shoot?" And I said, "I missed the cut, Byron." He said, "Well, sit down here." So I order breakfast, and I sit down with Byron Nelson. Oh my. And it's 7 o'clock on the Saturday morning. So we're talking, and I said, well, I couldn't figure out the wind on 12. I was looking at the flag on 11. And then he tells me the story. He says, whatever you do, don't look at the flag on 11. Don't look at the flag on 12. They're going to be going in different directions. What you need to do is look at the Spanish moss hanging off the trees just off the right side and trust only that wind. And then hit a right to left shot over the bunker. It's the only way you play it. So then, so he's telling me this, and I'm feeling really good about now. I'm not even thinking about missing the cut. And I decided to ask Byron about the theory that I adopted the year prior to becoming left lead hand dominant. And he told me the story about, he says, Richard, let me tell you, he says, I believe in that. He says, let me tell you the story about Ken Venturi and what he would do. He goes, Kenny, he would call him Kenny. Kenny would come to me and Ben Hogan for validation of his swings. I would tell him a few things. He'd go away. He'd come back. He'd master it, and I'd say, "Yes, that looks good." And he'd do this over and over. And he wanted the blessing of Ben Hogan and Byron.
Sure.
And then at the end of this thing, when Venturi got his swing to where he wanted, Byron said to him, he said, "Kenny," he says, "you need to do exactly what you're doing, only do it with your lead left side, your left hand." So he validated to me. So I had, even though I missed the cut at the Masters, my one and only time I played in the Masters, I was able to sit down with the great Byron Nelson in Augusta at the Masters and him tell me a story about the great Ken Venturi that involved him and Ben Hogan. So truly I came away from there. I didn't care if I missed the cut. The relationship that I established with Byron Nelson and the note that he gave me after winning and the encouragement that he gave me was just something that I'll take with me for the rest of my life.
Wow, what a great story. I'm in listening to that story, I'm imagining you would love to hear the insight about playing 11 and 12 the day before.
Well, yeah, and it was set upon me. I wanted to play the Masters next year and play the year after that,
Sure.
and then learn to play it properly. But I only got one chance. The year before, I finished I think 11th on the PGA Championship and missed qualifying for the Masters by a shot. But I didn't get my chance to play a number of Masters where I'd build up and learn how to play the golf course, because it's such a difficult golf course for rookies for a number of different reasons to learn and play. But but that's life. I accept what it is, and I have a great story about my friend Byron Nelson.
Well, and in the spirit of being excited about going to the Masters, and obviously our excitement about this week, I skipped over one of the key things I'm supposed to say. Follow us, like us, subscribe to us. Tough Lies Podcast.transistor.fm, Instagram at Tough Lies Podcast, on Twitter or X at Tough Lies Pod. Please make sure to give us a follow. Catch us on YouTube. Google us. Find us if you can't remember those reminders. But we do have a wonderful interview coming up. This is an abbreviated episode, just to be clear. But we were very lucky that Mike Weir, 2003 Masters champion, gave of his time. We cut this interview last week. Obviously very excited about sharing it with our listeners. And we're going to come back out of that interview, and I'm going to tap you for one more story before we go. So I hopefully everybody's in the spirit that we're in for this week. Please enjoy this coming great interview with Master Champion Mike Weir. Well, welcome back. It's so nice to see everybody. Tough Lies, the Golfers Podcast with my friend Richard Zokol and our incredibly special guest, 2003 Masters champion Mike Weir. It must be Masters Week if we're having you on. We're so grateful that you're here. How are you doing, Mike?
I'm doing great, Colin. Zoke, glad to be with you guys today.
Well, yeah, welcome to our Tight Lies, the Golfers Podcast. We're delighted.
Tough Lies.
What did I say?
Tight. You're still on the course.
I was thinking about how fast and firm fairways. Tough Lies, the Golfers Podcast. Wheersy, it's always a pleasure, and thank you very much for your nice blurb on my book that's coming out in May. Do appreciate that. Question.
Yeah.
This past weekend, and good playing, T14th at the Champions event in Newport Beach. That's fantastic. Want to ask you a question in light of the situation with Tiger that happened on Friday. Tiger's 50. He put in his entry into the this year's Senior U.S. Open, so it was clearly he was going to put some starts out on and particularly the USGA event. What was the sentiment in the locker room, if you don't mind asking, and about his peers and what happened to Tiger in the sad state of affairs that it's in? What are your thoughts?
Yeah. I think we came off the golf course on Friday, and in our scoring tent there was a little TV in there, and we saw the news, and I thought, are they rehashing something from 2021
in LA? Yeah.
In LA, and they're like, no, unfortunately not. This is current, and So first, was concern for him. Is he okay? And didn't really realize
course, yeah.
what was going on. We're signing our cards and kind of looking at what was happening on the TV. But I think everybody in our group was playing with Ben Crane and Cameron Percy. We were all just like, is he okay? And what's happening? Then we're just I think knowing maybe some of the background, what he's had to deal with, and just hoping for his own health and his family and for himself that he's okay and can kind of right the ship of his life and have a good chapter, the rest of his chapter of his life, golf or not, that it's healthy and he's there for his kids.
Yeah, as you say, right the ship of his life. That's key. That is the most important one. And I was, as I mentioned before, earlier in this podcast, that Kevin Kisner on the telecast on Saturday had talked about, it was devastating, and that he was really working on his game. And I thought the point was being missed that forget about his game. Who cares about his game? I think Tiger Woods, the legend, and the responsibility that is now in question, that in his position in this game, that's the true loss, and the empathy that went out. Everybody is caring for him and first and foremost about him and his mental health, and it's just an unfortunate situation. So let's move on to another subject.
So
go ahead, Colin.
I was hoping, and I think that sort of we can lead in with this. Tiger Woods has been playing a role at the forefront of what is a very significant transition for the PGA Tour. It is moving from a nonprofit organization to a for-profit, and there's lots of changes that we can see on the horizon, a reduction in terms of the number of tournaments, the number of players who have cards, all those sorts of things, of which Tiger is playing a significant leadership role. And I was curious, you must be taking all of this in. You had your lived experience on the tour. What are your thoughts about what we are seeing in terms of the direction the PGA Tour is taking under the new leadership of Brian Rolapp?
Yeah, Colin, I listened into the Brian's press conference at the Players Championship. I didn't catch it all, but I caught most of it. And I like the idea of moving away from these events that are no cut. I think Zoke and I are probably both old school, where you're just like, whether
if you play bad, go home.
Yeah, exactly. And so to speak, where guys are fighting in maybe some lesser events, having to make cuts, and these guys are getting events, getting more world ranking points, not having to make a cut.
Right.
There's always disparity on the tour, and you got to work your way into some bigger events, and that's fine. But the idea now that they're going to more these elevated events, I'm okay with the 120 man fields, and I know there's an evolution to the tour, and but I like to see that there are pathways now for guys to get in. There's 120 man fields; they're not short fields. It's changed from our era where 156 man fields in the summer where there's more daylight. That's changed, so it makes sense to maybe have a secondary tour where there is enough money there to be made and make a living, and still have the dream and goal of getting to the number one tour, whatever they call it, to get there. But there's change, and I think like you said, being for profit now with this group from the business side there that has invested a lot of money in the tour. They want to see a return, and I get that, but I like to see the integrity of the game stay with cuts, and so there was a lot of good things. I think for me, and I know Zoke is a big fan of the RBC Canadian Open. We want to see that elevated. I hope for their sake that it stays involved. He did say he wants to stay in big markets. I believe we can keep those in big markets in Canada, and hopefully get the RBC Canadian Open back elevated to a high level again.
So I want to jump over and talk about your experience with the President's Cup and where Mike, it seems to me that there's far too much importance being thrust on the captains. whether the team players, and it's the players' responsibility to perform, and there's nothing the captains can do about it. Hal Sutton spoke so eloquently about recently about if you win, if you're the captain of a winning Ryder Cup or President's Cup, or on the losing side of the Ryder Cup, or coach on the Ryder, captain on the Ryder Cup or President's Cup, it left a lot of people like, how quit golf for 5 years after it, and I'm sure you felt you're feeling some of the repercussion of your captaincy with the President's Cup. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. I didn't realize Hal had talked about that, but yeah, I mean, when you look back, when you don't win, of course, you kind of think about what maybe you could have done differently. I feel good about the time I put into it and all the thought that goes into it. Look, we put all this thought into it, all our minds. We had a pairing to go out day one, and we went 0-5. And I mean, we put all the work into it, right? Like, I mean, and then the next day, those pairings worked, and we went 5-0. So then our set shifted a little bit, where we had momentum with some of those groups. So we kind of tried to ride that. Being an underdog, we needed to find some spark and some energy to overcome maybe the world ranking deficit, so to speak. And I thought that was, we were trying to ride that momentum Friday. It didn't quite pan out, but yeah, you look back and say, maybe I could have paired these guys. Maybe I could have put them against different players. I mean, that's hindsight in any sport. You can look at that. Right. My goal was to try to put those guys in the best position I could and let them go play freely and get out there. And they played well. The U.S. was just a buzzsaw that week. They just played great.
Yeah, they were.
So, I mean, we're going to go all over the place because there's so many great questions to ask you, but it's hard not to resist wanting to talk a little bit about the Masters, given the time of the year and your history with it. I was in preparation for today. I was rewatching some of the highlights and so forth, and I think one of the things that gets lost in the backstory or the history was that it was a total washout on Thursday. You sort of had to deal with the 36-holer starting, split tees on the Friday. And I'm just curious, sort of like my view of you as a player was always one who sort of embraced the game when the conditions were toughest. And sort of a lot of people maybe, walked onto the turf that day and felt, wow, it's raining too much. The course is this, the course is that. And I was curious, did you see that as sort of a personal advantage when you were teeing it up on that Friday morning? Like, everybody may not be in the same mood or mindset that you would be, and sort of saw it as an advantage for you that day?
I think so. I think earlier that year, I was in a playoff with Charles Howell. The weather wasn't great the day before, and I remember having that similar mindset when guys were maybe struggling with that weather. And it goes back to Coach Tucker, as Zoke knows. When the tougher the conditions, he would always harp on us as this where you could gain an advantage when whether it was really strong winds or cold weather or wet weather or whatever. He kind of instilled that in us in our years at BYU. So that I remember that. I remember that, thinking that week where, obviously I had a lot of momentum going in that year to the Masters, but I used that as another thing, like
believing that. I believed it.
I believed it.
Yes.
Another little thing, I wasn't invited into the media to talk about me being maybe one of the favorites that week. And I took that as a little edge, even though I'd won twice earlier in the year and I felt like I was playing better than anybody. I felt like I was being disregarded. And then with this weather, I thought it's another little thing to add on to the week that I felt like I'd use to my advantage. You use these things, don't you, Zoke? You just kind of use whatever little thing you can to
It's leverage.
Leverage, yeah.
You leverage the situation, exactly. Yeah. And the young Canadians that are doing such a good job today, we're talking to Golf Canada, the new chief sport officer, Paul Perrier, and I mentioned to him that the encouragement that when you won the Masters in 2000, going this, from George Knudson to the, Bar Halderson, myself, and then you and Ian Leggett come along. Then you win the 2003 Masters, and what it's doing for the generation of players on tour today, the Corey Connors and the Hadwins, Hugh Mackenzie, Taylor Pendrith, and so forth. And now we're seeing the surgence from the most recent Sarduchen. We call him Darshan.
Sidarshan, yeah. Darshan.
And AJ Ewart that are performing right out of the blocks that has just been so impressive. I think this is a culmination of the investment that, like, literally they're able to impact and believe that they can do it because Mike Weir won the Masters in 2003. Very, very impactful.
Well, I hope so. I mean, I hope that's the case. That's nice of you to say. I think when I played with the Corey Connors and Nick and, like you said, Mac and these guys that I play with, I think they probably look at me and like, wow, where's he won the Masters? He doesn't do anything that special. You know, it's like,
If he can do it,
you know
I
what I
can do
mean?
it.
Honestly, like it really is. It's just like,
He can
it's a
toe hook in the
mindset.
trees
It's a
like we
belief.
can, yeah.
It's I didn't hit the ball like Tiger Woods or Ernie Els or, it was just chipping away at my weaknesses, enhancing my strengths, making my game well-rounded, and keep believing and building it on the top tens and then maybe a top three, and you build on a win at maybe not a big tournament, and then that leads to another bigger tournament, and then that leads to confidence in majors, and it's just a series of things. And I think that's what I've tried to instill when I played practice rounds with these guys as they get into their 30s now. Keep stacking these little wins all the time,
Brick by brick,
a big putt to make a cut.
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Anything like that you just keep
building
and,
their belief system.
Yeah.
That's your strength. I mean, you learn to become a great ball striker, but you weren't a great ball striker when you started. But what you
not
did
at all.
have consistently, right from before the days when you went to BYU, you had a belief you wanted to achieve. You built on it and learned from your mistakes. And in my opinion, the greatest thing, and I've mentioned this to you before, the greatest thing about Mike Weir is Mike Weir's belief system and his perseverance. So it's his mindset.
Yeah, and that's what I've tried to tell the guys. So I think, these young guys, as you mentioned too, they're coming out more prepared out of college. I think, I was still, very raw coming out of college and not a real pro. I relayed that story at the Canadian Open, one of my first Canadian Opens, hitting balls beside Nick Price and facing him being a lefty and seeing these things come off like missiles in the sound of the strike and thinking to myself, well, he's a pro and I'm a pro, but there's a whole different level there's a big gap between being a pro and a top level pro. I got to close this gap here. And they're just coming out more polished now at a younger age, and their techniques are better and they're better ball strikers. So, but it is getting those belief systems up now, as you said, and stacking those good finishes and getting yourselves in contention and stumbling and learning from those stumbles and moving on.
Yeah, one of my recollections, from your past career, Mike, was that you played in some faraway places, but you didn't sort of immediately land on the PGA Tour like some of these players coming out of college and so forth. And I was curious, understanding your path versus, the ones that we're seeing, how hard was it to maintain that level of belief when you're playing in some very sort of distant places, nobody's watching, nobody cares, did that drive the fire that underpinned the direction you're on? Or, were there hard times where you really sort of questioned, whether it was going to end up the way it ultimately did?
Well, it was all of the above, and I don't think I ever envisioned where it was going to lead, but I think I had enough little signs of success, even missing cuts in Australia and the Asian Tour and doing all that kind of stuff, that I would say, okay, it's just not consistent. Like the game was there and there was good things there. I just got to learn how to simplify things and see what works for me, see what works under pressure for me, and learning in those moments. But sure, there was tough times when I'd come back from playing the Australian Tour and, with no money, and go back to the Canadian Tour and scrap it around there and, make a few $1,000. But, I would show some signs. I mean, I remember that when the Air Canada Championship was in its infancy, and I was on the Canadian Tour, and I had a chance to win there, and I dumped one in the water on 18 and finished fifth. But, I was still on the Canadian Tour, and in my head, I finished fifth in the PGA Tour event against really good players. And
that was a big deal.
Going into the next year in the Canadian Tour, my game elevated, so those little things like that, you kind of showed me some life to kind of keep going. Yeah.
Well, good. Well, we can't thank you enough for joining us. Please give Joni my regards to Michelle and your whole family with the situation you're dealing with at home.
Thank you.
And have fun at the Masters, and play well. Hope you're able to play 4 rounds and go deep. Have fun.
Made some good strides this week in Newport. So short game got better, and that's what you need around there. So optimistic going in there.
Well, you know that better than most.
I want to, before you go, Mike, I want to share sort of two things that have just been burning me. One is I totally feel like you got hosed when it came to Player of the Year that year in 2003. You won a major, you won a couple other events, and you didn't. You should have been Player of the Year. It's just been. The other thing I wanted to share too, it was just as a Canadian, we have. And sort of as with the gray hair, I continually believe it's about the experiences, moments in life. And I just want to share this one moment. So you won the Masters, and what some people wouldn't know was the very next day you had an event in Toronto, and you dropped puck at the Leaf game with your Masters jacket on. I was in the crowd at that game, and I never normally sing the national anthem because I have a terrible voice. But for me, it was the most Canadian I've ever felt, and so proud of what you accomplished. All of the guys from back in the day at the Thames Valleys of the world and the Fanshaws and the Sarnia, it was just a really wonderful moment. So I just wanted to, on my behalf, say thank you so much, because it was just a total highlight. I remember it to this day.
Yeah, thanks, Colin. It was a highlight for me too. It was a cool experience, kind of organic experience, and I remember that one for sure.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you again so much for joining us on this special Masters edition of Tough Lives, the Golfers podcast. Hopefully, we'll be able to have you back sometime along the journey that we're going on, and really, really, really appreciate your time joining us today.
Yeah, love
Thanks
to be
so
on
much,
anytime,
Mike.
guys.
Have
Thanks,
a great
guys.
week.
Yeah,
Thanks.
all the best.
Okay. Cheers, fellas.
See ya.
This episode of Tough Lives is brought to you by TrueSpec AI Yardage Intelligence. Most golfers use GPS. Smart golfers use data. TrueSpec pairs high-resolution course mapping with AI-powered shot strategy through a mobile app that knows exactly where you are on the course, current wind conditions, elevation change, and most importantly, your shot tendencies. It doesn't just tell you the number, it recommends the club, the target, even the smart miss. All you have to do is execute. TrueSpec, AI Yardage Intelligence, because strategy should be automatic. Pressure is not.
Well, what a great interview with Mike Weir. Hey, Zoke? I mean, my quick thought, and I want to unpack a couple of things that he said. One of the things that struck me was I always thought it was his intrinsic Canadian background that sort of led him to have the resolve to sort of weather the tough weather. The year that he won, it was a total washout, and he had a 36-hole day on the Friday. But he credits BYU and the coach that you had there, and I was really interested in hearing that, because I thought, well, it never occurred to me that a coach of a college team would sort of take that sort of extra step in terms of mentally preparing his players at scale, for dealing with bad weather.
Absolutely, and Coach Carl Tucker, who was like a father to many of us, and he wasn't a golf instructor or a golf pro, so he didn't touch the golf swing. He didn't teach us, the techniques of golf swing. He built us up as individuals, and what Mike talked about was saying, look, when he called it when uncle adversity comes around, you have to be prepared to accept uncle adversity. And so Mike gave us an example, and I felt the same thing. So he taught us when the old sayings, the cliches, when the tough get going, those types of things. And so Mike knew that if he wanted to become a major champion or a successful PGA Tour player, he had to bring a better perspective and a pit bull and killer perspective and attitude to the golf course. So when the tough got going, as they say,
As they say, Yeah.
Those aspects of which are the mental side of the game, and
well,
Mike passes in spades on all aspects of that.
Yeah, and what was really, I would say, following that train of thought, what was also very interesting to me on the mental side, I would say, was, he would use things as sort of that worked for him as far as extra motivation was concerned.
Incentivizing him. Yes.
So it's the idea that he's like, wait a minute, I'm playing better than anybody right now. I won a couple of events. I'm going in the Masters, and they're not even having me in to discuss how I'm a favorite to win this week.
Yeah.
It's like it's
extra
on,
motivation.
Mofo.
Yeah,
it is on, Mofo, and it's like you could see it sort of steeled his resolve, and it's like
absolutely,
and that manipulation of that sort of dig that he took was just that extra sort of piece of like I'll show you.
That's right. It's a very important aspect of it, and it's one that's involved myself as well. And that's the difference. That's the mental perspective that allowed Mike to break through, to pierce that veil, and win the Masters.
Yeah, amazing. So I couldn't help but pick up a bit of a smile when Mike was talking about the BYU, which sort of led me to believe, like you've said it a few times off air that you've got some great BYU stories. So my thought was when I saw that, I was like, I'm going to call on Zoke after this interview because my guess is he's got some sort of BYU story that he wants to bring. And this is a special episode of Tough Life, so why not see if you've got a great story about that?
Well, there's numerous stories. There's some we can tell, and there's some we can't tell. This one, I'm not sure on which line of it sits.
I'll tell you after it's over.
Okay, all right. So at BYU in 1977, Jim Nelford, he's the first Canadian to go down there. He had a lot of success. I went down there. Then there was Brent Franklin. Then there was Rick Gibson. There's a chain of Canadians that ended through Mike Weir going to play for BYU. Now, we are all non-Mormons, and we're attending a Mormon school, and all for the right reasons. But you need to understand when you're a non-Mormon going to a Mormon school, they're typically an athlete that's going there. You don't have to become a Mormon, but you have to abide by their rules and regulations, which is fair enough. And as Mormons, if you don't know, are very, they don't drink and all this stuff. And so in order to get past, you have to go through a Mormon bishop interview, and they ask all kinds of questions.
Oh my
God! Some are very uncomfortable.
They interview you.
They interview you, and you are either accepted or rejected based on your morality, right there. And it's a moral interview.
Okay, so this just in, I would have at that time never made it.
Well,
at BYU.
Let me tell you, when I did my Mormon bishop interview, I told some white lies. Let's put it that way. I wanted to go there. So anyway, this story, Rick Gibson tells a story, and often we get together as a group of guys, and we tell this story. Like, you're not allowed to drink or anything like that. There is smoke. Yeah. But we get together over a few beers, and we every time we drank, if you did sneak a beer here and there, you ran the risk of, if you got caught, you would be kicked out of school.
Oh, wow.
Like, seriously, that's how serious it was. So anyway, the Rick Gibson, who's a great... Rick Gibson, for those who don't know, he's from Victoria. He was a hell of a good player, won the CPGA championship. He played mostly in the Asian tour. And Gibber, as we called him, was just a funny guy. And I got his permission to tell this story, and I put it in the book. So here is Rick Gibson's interview with the Mormon bishop. And the Mormon bishop says to Rick, he says, "Do you drink tea or coffee?" And Gibber says, "Yes, I drink coffee." And then he says, "In our words of wisdom, the Lord commands us, Mormons, to abstain from harmful substances, and we are taught not to drink hot drinks," meaning coffee or tea. So Gibson says, "Well, that won't be a problem." Then the bishop says, "Do you smoke, or do you do any tobacco products?" And he goes, "No, sir, don't smoke, don't do any tobacco products." Bishop goes, "That's good." He said, "Do you drink alcohol?" And Gibson says, "Well, I have a few beers now and then," thinking nothing of it. And the bishop says, "Well, if you go to BYU, you cannot drink alcohol at all." And Gibson says to him, "Well, that won't be a problem." He says, the bishop then says, "Do you have a girlfriend?" He says, no, not at the moment. I don't have a girlfriend. He says, have you ever had a girlfriend? He goes, yes. He says, have you had premarital sex?
Oh.
Gibson goes, yes. He says, if you go to BYU, you must abstain from having any premarital sex. And Gibson goes, okay. And then the bishop goes, do you masturbate? And Gibson, in his own mind, he says, it sounds like I'm going to have to start. So, and Rick didn't actually say that to the bishop. He said it in his mind. And when he told that story amongst Mike Weir and all of us and Jim Nelford, we roared our heads off. But that's just the type of guy Rick Gibson is. He's a wonderful person. And we had to endure kind of like situations. If you're going to go to BYU for 4 years, and if you're going to do anything untoward their rules, you might be shown the door on short order.
Oh my goodness. Well, I mean, as one who roots for great stories, that's an all-timer. I got to tell you, I can't wait to see that written in print in your book. Oh my goodness.
It is. It's in the book.
But absolutely, I was out of being qualified at the coffee part of your story. I would have had a lifetime ban based on the rest of it. That's for sure. But what a great story.
And if you wanted to go to BYU, which I was prepared to do, I had no problem. And as it turned out, I did have a few beers from time to time, and you ran the risk. But you had to be very careful, and again, it's just kind of a measure of what you're prepared to take on in order to achieve something if you wanted it bad enough.
Yeah, and certainly our guest there. Mike Weir, 2003 Masters champion, obviously one of the all-time greats from BYU, Brigham Young University, for those who don't know, in Utah. I wanted to also say, for me, I told that story at the end of the interview about how I just love the fact that he was dropping the puck at the Maple Leaf game.
Yeah.
And I did sing the national anthem. I didn't add the part where it's like I sang at the top of my lungs, and it was so bad, but everybody was. It wasn't just. It was really something to behold because everybody was feeling, I think, the same thing at that moment.
Yes, absolutely.
And it was just an incredible experience.
National pride, and Mike will always go down as a Canadian legend.
Canadian legend, great guy. And really personable, thoughtful,
honest.
Very honest, very he's the quintessential Canadian to me. It's like he fights super hard when the game is on, but he's also quite happy to go have a beer and a chat and a laugh afterwards.
Absolutely.
And that's so
and tell BYU
so
stories.
Yeah, exactly. So thanks to our listeners for joining us on this special episode, Masters Week episode of Tough Flies, the Golfers Podcast. Once again, a reminder to follow us on Instagram at Tough Flies Podcast. Also follow us or go to our website, toughfliespodcast.transistor.fm. So great to see you again, Richard. I'm excited for this week. We're gonna have we got to have a great follow-up conversation. I mean, there's always great stories coming to the Masters, so I'm sure we're gonna have a lot to talk about on Monday. But have a great week, and I really, really enjoyed this week. Thanks for being part of it.
Thanks, Colin. Always a pleasure.
Join us next week on the Golfers Podcast with Richard Zopel and Colin Doodle.